All right, everyone, gather round and listen up, because the first story we read diving into is the one that really blew the lid off this whole thing. This is the incredible, terrifying account of the Giant of Kandahar. It all starts back in 2002 in the rugged, treacherous mountains of Kandahar province, Afghanistan. This region was a known Taliban stronghold, and U.S. Special Forces were deep in search and destroy territory, rooting out insurgents from the endless maze of caves and mountain passes. These missions were already incredibly dangerous. You're dealing with IEDs, ambushes, in a landscape that's as much an enemy as the Taliban themselves. But then, something out of the ordinary happens. A U.S. Army patrol, operating deep in the mountains, goes completely silent. No radio contact, no check-ins, nothing. They just vanished. In a war zone, silence like that is a blaring alarm. So command does what it has to do. They send in another elite special forces team. Their mission is grim but clear. Find the missing soldiers, or what's left of them, and figure out what happened. This second team is inserted into the last known location of the vanished patrol. As they move through the desolate, rocky terrain, they start finding things. First, a piece of scattered military gear. Then, a shredded uniform. It's a gruesome, macabre trail of breadcrumbs, leading them higher into the mountains. The team is on high alert, rifles at the ready, because whatever did this to hardened soldiers could still be nearby. The trail leads them up a steep, winding footpath to the mouth of a large cave. And what they see there stops them dead in their tracks. Littering the ground outside the cave entrance are piles and piles of bones. Human bones. Their first thought is that they've stumbled upon a major Taliban hideout, a kind of execution site. But before they can even formulate a plan of attack, a sound erupts from the darkness of the cave, a primal, terrifying war cry that echoes off the surrounding mountains. Emerging into the daylight is something straight out of a nightmare. A man, if you can call him that, of monstrous proportions. He's at least 12 to 13 feet tall, with wild, untamed red hair and a long, fiery red beard. His body is wrapped in animal skins, and he's wielding a massive, crude spear. The team is frozen for a split second, trying to process what they're seeing. This isn't a Taliban fighter. This is a literal giant. But there's no time to be stunned. The giant charges. Before the soldiers can even fully raise their rifles, the creature closes the distance with terrifying speed. With one powerful thrust, it impales one of the team members, lifting him clean off the ground on the end of its spear. That's when the training kicks in. The spell is broken, and the rest of the team opens fire. They unleash a relentless, sustained barrage of gunfire directly into the giant's body. For a full 30 seconds, they pour lead into this thing. Finally, the colossal figure stumbles, groans, and collapses to the ground, dead. The harrowing ordeal is over as quickly as it began. The operators, shaken but alive, immediately radio their command base. You have to imagine the guy on the other end of that radio, hearing the most insane situation report of his life. Skinwalker 2, be advised, Sierra 1 is down. Tango was a giant, a very large man with a wooden spear. It must have sounded like a prank, but the urgency and shock in their voices made it clear this was terrifyingly real. While waiting for extraction, the soldiers took a closer look at the creature they had just killed. It was massive, smelling foul and musky, like a skunk mixed with a dead body. They measured it as best they could, confirming it was around 13 feet tall. But the strangest details were yet to come. The giant had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And when they looked inside its gaping mouth, they saw not 1, but 2 rows of teeth. It also came to the horrifying realization of what happened to the first patrol. The piles of bones, the shredded gear, the giant had eaten them. Soon, a Chinook transport helicopter arrives, not just for the soldiers, but with a large cargo net and a heavy-duty loading pallet. The orders from on high were clear: bring the body back. The crew loaded the 1,100-pound corpse onto the helicopter for the flight back to base, the whole cabin filled with its unbearable stench. Upon their return, the soldiers were immediately whisked away for a debriefing. They recounted every detail of the insane encounter, and after they told their story, they were all handed non-disclosure agreements. They were ordered to never speak of this again. The official story would be something else entirely. The giant's body disappeared, loaded onto another transport plane, rumored to be heading for a secret base in Ohio, possibly Wright-Patterson, a place already famous for its connection to strange and unexplained phenomena. The operators were left with no proof, just a traumatic memory that, for years, they knew no one would ever believe. Okay, now for our second story. This one takes us to a different part of Afghanistan, a few years after the bloody encounter in Kandahar. It comes from a U.S. Army Infantry Team Leader who was deployed to the Kunar province between 2008 and 2009. What's fascinating about this account is that it is not a chaotic firefight. It's a quiet, chilling observation from a distance, and it happened before the Kandahar story became widely known. So picture this. It's the dead of night. A soldier and his team are on an observation patrol, set up on a high ridge overlooking a village. Intel suggests this village is a source for IEDs, the devastating roadside bombs that were a constant threat. Their job is to sit there, in the cold and the dark, and just watch. On this particular night, the lieutenant hands our team leader a new piece of high-tech gear. It's a thermal imaging system called the Recon 3. It's brand new, and nobody's really trained on it yet. The LT basically tells him, "Here, figure this thing out and teach the other guys." So he starts messing with it, pointing it across the valley, getting a feel for the controls. He's scanning the landscape, a world of ghostly white-hot and black-cold shapes, when his eyes are drawn to a large heat signature on one of the peaks along the same mountain spur they re on. It's a big, warm blob. Now, his first thought is perfectly logical and based on his training and experience. He assumes it's a group of Taliban fighters. They often huddled together like that in the mountains, trying to stay warm around a small fire or just sharing body heat. He tries to zoom in to get a clearer image, to see if he can count them or spot any weapons. He's focused, trying to do his job. And then the blob moves. But it doesn't scatter like a group of men getting up. It doesn't break apart into smaller heat signatures. The entire massive heat signature stands up as one single being. Let that sink in. What he thought was a group of 5 or 6 men was just one person. And this is where it gets truly mind-bending. The soldier knows this terrain. He knows that the trees in that area grow to be about 10, maybe 12 feet tall. This thing was at least as tall as the surrounding trees, and possibly even taller. It starts to move, walking parallel to his position. And the way it moved was just unreal. It wasn't running frantically or moving awkwardly. It had this long, slow, relaxed stride, but it was covering ground with impossible speed. Its legs must have been immensely long. With an ease that defied its massive size, it traversed the rugged landscape, and within moments, it disappeared from his view behind a neighboring spur. He's left there, sitting in the darkness, staring into the imager, completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he had just seen. He immediately started to doubt himself, thinking maybe it was a trick of the thermals, a distortion, or maybe he was just exhausted and his eyes were playing tricks on him. He had never seen anything like it in his life. So what do you do with that information? Who do you tell? How do you write that in an after-action report? Observed one entity, approximately 12 feet tall, moving at high speed. You'd be laughed out of the briefing room and probably sent for a psych evaluation. So, he did what most people would do. He kept it to himself. He pushed it to the back of his mind and focused on the mission. Even after he left the army, he rarely spoke of it, convinced people would think he was crazy. Then, years later, he's listening to the radio and hears a broadcast of the Coast to Coast AM show. And they're telling a story about a special forces team in Kandahar who killed a 13-foot-tall, red-haired giant. Suddenly, the memories of that night on the mountain came flooding back. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't his imagination. Someone else had seen one. And a detail from that radio story, the giant's red hair, triggered another memory, something he had witnessed but never understood. He remembered a strange tradition among the local Afghan villagers in his area. Every once in a while, they would dye their hair a bright, vivid orange red. They even dyed the hair of their goats the exact same color. Then, just as suddenly, the orange-dyed goats would be gone, and the villagers' hair would return to its natural color. At the time, he wrote it off as just another cultural practice he didn't understand. But now, connecting the dots, a chilling new possibility emerged. Was that a tribute? A gesture of appeasement? Were those orange-dyed goats a sacrificial offering to the giant, red-haired creatures that roamed the mountains? For this soldier, the puzzle pieces snapped into place. He became convinced that what he saw that night through a thermal scope was a member of an ancient race of giants, still hiding in the most remote, war-torn corners of our world. All right, we've heard from the soldiers on the ground, in the thick of it, but this next story gives us a completely different, and in some ways, even more chilling perspective. We're going to the eye in the sky with an Air Force veteran who piloted one of the most advanced surveillance platforms in the world, the MQ-9 Reaper drone. This isn't a story of a sudden, violent encounter. This is a story of quiet, deliberate observation, of peeling back the curtain on a world hidden from sight, and confirming that something truly massive is living up in those mountains. Our narrator was a senior operator, flying a Reaper on a mission over the northern part of Afghanistan. If you don't know, a Reaper drone can loiter for hours at high altitude, its powerful cameras seeing everything. The operators are thousands of miles away, safe in a control room, but their eyes are right there, scanning every rock and shadow. His job was routine: scan the area, look for threats, gather intelligence. He was flying over the central mountains, a region with tiny, isolated villages perched at incredibly high altitudes. He'd flown over this exact area a dozen times before. It was familiar territory. As he's doing his thing, just scanning around, he focuses in on a super small, isolated mud hut. It's just a speck in the vast, rugged landscape. But tonight, something is different. There are heat signatures moving around it. He zooms in, the infrared camera turning the world into a black and white landscape of heat. And what he sees is unmistakable. These weren't normal people. He described them as being 3, maybe even 4 meters tall. For us, that's between 10 and 13 feet. Now you might be thinking, how could he be so sure from that high up? Well, this is where the operator's technical knowledge gives the story so much weight. On the drone's display, there's a targeting crosshair. That crosshair has a ruler tool, a digital scale that tells the operator how wide the crosshair is at any given zoom level. He stated very clearly that these figures were as tall as his crosshair was wide. It wasn't a guess. It was a measurement. But the most surreal part of his story isn't just their size. It's what they were doing. They weren't rampaging monsters. They weren't engaging in some secret, nefarious activity. They were just living. They were doing normal, everyday things. One was tending a fire. Others were walking around, doing simple chores. In his own words, they were just moped around their small clearing. He saw a few goats tied up nearby, and this is the detail that really gives you a sense of scale. He said the goats looked like cats next to them. Can you imagine that? A full-grown goat looking like a house cat next to these beings. Because he was using the infrared camera at night, all he could see were their black, humanoid heat signatures against the cold ground. He couldn't make out fine details, but he could tell they wore rugged, heavy cloaks, similar to the traditional garb of the local Afghans. The operator was absolutely certain of what he was seeing. There was no ambiguity. He was watching a small, hidden community of giants go about their nightly routine. He said he wishes he could have switched to the daytime, full-color camera. He, like everyone else who's heard the legends, wanted to know the one burning question. Did they have red hair? But he never got the chance. The drone was on a set flight path. He was only able to watch this incredible, hidden spectacle for about 10 minutes before the Reaper flew too far away, and the tiny village of giants faded from his screen. He was left with the undeniable knowledge of what he saw. Unlike the soldiers on the ground, who had a fleeting, terrifying glimpse, this drone operator got to be a voyeur, a silent observer of a lost world. For 10 minutes, he witnessed a scene that proves the mountains of Afghanistan harbor secrets far older and far larger than any war. So far, we've had a terrifying up-close battle, and we've had distant sightings through thermal scopes and drone cameras. This fourth story is different again. It takes us into the intelligence world, into the dark, quiet rooms where the real work of modern warfare often happens. This is the account of an analyst, a man whose job was to watch, to analyze, and to find the needle in the haystack. This story comes from an Air Force veteran who worked as an FMV or full-motion video analyst sometime between 2012 and 2018. These are the guys who stared live and recorded drone feeds for hours on end, piecing together the daily lives of people in a target area. Their mission is called establishing a pattern of life. When do people wake up? Where do they go? Do they carry weapons? It's meticulous, often mind-numbingly boring work, but it's absolutely crucial for keeping ground troops safe. The footage he was tasked with reviewing came from one of the most infamous and dangerous places in Afghanistan, the Korangal Valley in Kunar Province, often called the Valley of Death. This area was a major highway for Taliban insurgents, funneling men and supplies across the border with Pakistan. The analyst is deep into a pre-op soak, meaning he's watching everything that moves in an area before a mission goes in. He's got his eyes on a video feed showing a small group of men gathered around a campfire at night. On an infrared display, it's a familiar scene, a cluster of warm bodies against the cold landscape. Totally normal. His job is to just watch, wait, and see if he can identify any weapons or suspicious activity. 20 minutes go by. It's just guys sitting by a fire. But his attention is drawn to one lumpy shape near the group. To his trained eye, it looks like two men huddled close together under a single blanket to ward off the mountain cold. Again, a perfectly normal sight, and then the blanket stands up. Except it's not a blanket, and it's not two men. In a single fluid motion, the shape resolves itself into one person. And this person is enormous. The analyst is just floored. He's looking at his screen, at the other figures around the fire, and then at this new, towering figure. He said, and this is a direct quote, "This guy made the rest of the dudes look like children in terms of height." The giant figure casually walks over to a nearby mud hut. To get inside, he has to bend way over, practically folding himself in half to fit through the doorway. The visual was undeniable. This was no trick of the camera, no strange shadow. This was a living, breathing giant. Based on the relative size of the other men and the hut, the analyst estimated this individual was at least 8 or 9 feet tall. Not as colossal as the 13-foot Kandahar giant, but still a towering figure that would dwarf even the tallest basketball player. Because he was watching on an infrared camera, the screen was a world of black and white heat. He couldn't tell if the giant had red hair or see any other features, but he didn't need to. The size and presence of this being were enough. It was, in his words, a big mother effer. But here's the most profound part of this story. This giant wasn't a solitary beast living in a cave, like the one in Kandahar. It wasn't part of a hidden community, separate from the world, like the ones the Reaper pilot saw. This giant was sitting around a campfire, intermingling with regular, local Afghan men. They were sharing the same fire, the same space. This observation completely changes the game. It suggests that, in some of these remote, tribal areas, the existence of giants isn't a myth or a terrifying secret. It's just a fact of life. It raises incredible questions. Are they seen as revered elders, protectors, or are they a ruling class, with the smaller humans subservient to them? The analyst's job was to report anomalies, and he had certainly found one. But how do you even begin to file a report like that? This brief 20-minute observation from a sterile, air-conditioned room thousands of miles away provided a stunning glimpse into a reality where ancient myths walk among men, sharing the warmth of a fire on a cold Afghan night. All right, let's shift gears and head to another part of the country for our fifth story. This account is so compelling because it's not just about what the soldier saw, but about how modern military technology turned a strange sighting into a shocking, undeniable mathematical certainty. And this time, it's not from an American, but from an officer in the Australian Army. Our narrator is a lieutenant deployed to the central Urizgan province. The scene is a familiar one for any combat soldier. It's the dead of night, those early, silent hours before dawn when you're fighting to stay awake. He's on picket duty, what American troops would call sentry or security, perched in his light armored vehicle, or LAV. His job is to use the vehicle's powerful optics to scan the valley, keeping an eye out for any insurgent activity. He's sweeping the landscape with the LAV's thermal imager, the world outside reduced to ghostly shapes of heat, and then he sees it. A large, human-like figure moving in the distance. His first impression is that it's just different. It doesn't move like the local Afghans, and through the low-resolution thermal imager, it doesn't appear to be wearing their traditional clothing. It's taller, lankier. He watches as it walks behind a few compounds, the low-walled mud brick buildings common in the region. He can clearly see the figure from the chest and armpits up, over the tops of the compound walls. Now, this is where the training of a professional soldier kicks in. He's an officer. His brain is wired to assess and analyze. Based on his experience, his gut tells him the figure is about 500, maybe 600 meters away, a reasonable distance. But he needs to be sure. He needs hard data. So he decides to use his LAV's laser rangefinder, or LRF. This is a piece of equipment that shoots a laser beam at a target and gives you a precise, down-to-the-meter distance reading. He knows he'll get a good, solid return signal from the flat, hard surfaces of the compound walls the figure is walking behind. He aims, and he lasers the wall. The number that flashes back on his screen must have made his blood run cold. It wasn't 500 meters. It wasn't 600 meters. The rangefinder gave a distance of 1,800 meters. Let that sink in for a moment. That's 1.8 kilometers. That's over a mile away. Suddenly, the entire picture changes. The math is brutal and simple. If you can see something from the chest up over a compound wall, and that something is over a mile away, it cannot be human. It has to be astronomically, impossibly tall. The officer did the quick calculation in his head and came to a staggering conclusion. The figure he was watching would have to be at least 12 feet tall. He just sits there, stunned, watching this lanky, 12-foot giant. It wasn't in any hurry. It was just walking calmly, deliberately, through the valley. He tracked it for about 5 minutes before it finally moved beyond his field of view and disappeared into the night. He was left alone in the silent darkness of his vehicle, his mind reeling. He had just witnessed something that defied all logic. but his own high-tech equipment had proven it was real. Like the others, he never told anyone. Who would believe him? What could he even say? He carried that incredible secret with him for years, a 5-minute observation in the middle of an Afghan night that completely changed his understanding of what could be hiding in the forgotten corners of the world. And now we arrive at our final story. In some ways, this one is the most profound and deeply unsettling of them all. It doesn't involve a chaotic firefight or a ghostly image seen through a high-tech lens. There are no lasers or infrared cameras. This story is raw, human, and direct. It comes from a face-to-face conversation on the ground, a moment where the veil between the modern world of warfare and a much older reality was peeled back, revealing a truth that was as baffling as it was terrifying. Our source for this account is a journalist named Mike, but before he was a journalist, he was an Army combat veteran who served in the rugged, unforgiving terrain of Afghanistan. Mike is a pragmatic, grounded individual, the kind of person whose experiences have taught him to trust what he can see and verify, not to chase after shadows or fairy tales. This makes his story all the more powerful. His unit was operating deep in eastern Afghanistan, in that wild, porous border region with Pakistan, a landscape of soaring peaks and deep valleys that has defied conquerors for millennia. Their mission was a classic example of what the military calls human or human intelligence gathering. The job sounds simple on paper. Go into local villages, sit down with the elders, drink countless cups of chai, and through a trusted interpreter, try to build enough rapport to learn about Taliban movements. It's a delicate dance of respect, suspicion, and veiled questions. A crucial part of a war, fought not just with bullets, but with information. On this particular day, Mike and his team found themselves in a small, isolated village, sitting across from a wizened elder. The old man's face was a roadmap of a hard life, his eyes holding a wisdom that felt ancient. The initial conversation followed the usual script. The interpreter translated their questions about strangers in the area, about weapons caches, about anything that could give them an edge. The elder was polite, but guarded, offering little. But then, something in the dynamic shifted. Perhaps the elder saw a flicker of genuine respect in the young soldier's eyes, or perhaps he felt a paternal need to warn these outsiders who were so clearly out of their element. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a more serious, urgent tone. The interpreter paused, listening intently before turning back to Mike. "He says you should not go into the mountains," the interpreter relayed. "He is very serious about this." Mike and his squad leader exchanged a knowing look. This was it. This was the intel they were after. "Ask him why," Mike said. "Is it the Taliban? Is there an ambush point we need to know about?" The interpreter posed the question. The old man shook his head, a gesture of emphatic denial. The interpreter turned back, a look of confusion on his own face. "He says no, it is not the Taliban. He says there are individuals living up there. He says the villagers try to avoid them." The soldiers leaned in, intrigued. This was unexpected. The elder continued, his hands beginning to move, painting a picture with gestures as he spoke. He described how these individuals would come down from the highest peaks and harass the local shepherds when they took their goats to graze in the high pastures. And then came the first truly bizarre detail. The interpreter said, "He says they throw large rocks at them." Rocks. In a country saturated with AK-47s and RPGs, the primary threat this man was describing was rock throwing. A few of the younger soldiers stifled a smirk. Mike, however, remained focused. The elder was not joking. His fear was palpable. In Mike's mind, a new theory formed. They had to be foreign fighters, maybe Chechens or Syrians, who were so isolated they hadn't been resupplied and were resorting to primitive tactics. "Okay," Mike said, gesturing to his own weapon and then to his men. "Ask him if these people carry rifles. Ask him what they look like." This was the moment the conversation went from strange to utterly surreal. The interpreter relayed the question, and the elder looked directly at the American soldiers. He pointed a long, bony finger at them. The interpreter turned to Mike, his eyes wide. He says they have no rifles. He says, "They are like you guys. They are white." A wave of confusion washed over the soldiers. Other Westerners? Hiding in the mountains? It made no sense. Were they rogue special forces? Mercenaries? The elder wasn't finished. "He says they wear clothes like his people," the interpreter continued. "But they are different. They have beards. They are very heavy set." The interpreter used a word in Pashto that conveyed immense bulk and power. Then the old man looked at Mike, who stood well over 6 feet, and the other tall Americans on his team. He raised his hand high in the air. "And he says they are super tall," the interpreter finished, his voice barely a whisper. "Like you guys." The soldiers were completely thrown. The pieces didn't fit any logical puzzle. A group of tall, pale-skinned, heavily built, bearded men who dressed like locals, lived in the mountains, didn't carry guns, and threw rocks at people. It was a dead end. When Mike and his team brought this bizarre piece of intelligence back to their base, their superiors dismissed it almost immediately. "It's nothing," they were told. "Probably some nomadic tribe or just a local spooky story. Don't worry about it." So they dropped it. The report was filed away, and the strange encounter became just another weird anecdote from a long and confusing deployment. Years went by. Mike left the army and began his career as a journalist. The memory of that old man's warning faded, filed away on a dusty shelf in the back of his mind. Then he started coming across the stories. A blog post here, a podcast there. He read the incredible account of a special forces team in Kandahar that had allegedly fought and killed a 13-foot giant with red hair and 6 fingers. He heard the tale of the drone operator who watched a village of giants from the sky. He read the testimony of the Australian officer whose laser rangefinder confirmed he was looking at a 12-foot tall figure from over a mile away. And as he absorbed these accounts, a jolt went through him. That long-forgotten conversation in the small village on the Pakistani border came flooding back with stunning clarity. Every single detail the old man had given them snapped into place. The paleness, the beards, the massive height and build, the primitive, aggressive behavior of throwing rocks. The chilling realization washed over him. The old man hadn't been giving them faulty intel about some unknown group of foreign fighters. He had been giving them a genuine generational survival warning. He was describing, with perfect accuracy, the same kind of beings that other soldiers had encountered across the country. He wasn't telling them where the enemy was. He was telling them where the monsters were. What Mike and his team had written off as a bizarre local legend was, in fact, the most critical and truthful piece of intelligence they had ever received, and they had been utterly incapable of understanding it. They were looking for insurgents, while the elder was trying to keep them from wandering into a giant's territory.